Welcome to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. My name is Shannon Boucher. I'm coming to you from Ottawa. This week, Melanie is on remote location on the shores of Lake Simcoe with a little story local to her. This week, we're going to talk about some legal news, both domestically and internationally. Big legal story hit the news this week with some Canadian implications. WPATH and the United Nations / World Health Organization both have Canada connections in gender news this week. A Quebec doctor was suspended from practice for 3 months, and a predator was set free in Ontario with a habit of impersonating and appropriating identities of doctors and priests and the royal family and the opposite sex. We're going to finish off with a little short video from CHEO, which we talked about last week, Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. And maybe Melanie and I will talk a little bit about that for the weekly report. How are you, Melanie?
All right. I'm actually better than I'm having a nice little relaxing getaway whilst trying to follow up on some stories. But yeah, it's been a good week. I'm enjoying my weekend. I don't know how many. I noticed there was a few more subscribers last week. So if you're watching again this week and you subscribed last week, thank you very much for that. Feel free to like and subscribe to this video here. I wanted to just apologize to anyone who's new to, any of our subscribers, anyone watching the video from last week. I forgot to edit out something, and I realized that a bit late. And I have been obsessing about this all week. How embarrassing! So I just wanted to throw that out there. Under the radar.
I had a professor in the university who used to make us act out the plays that we were studying in English class, and for anyone who's been on stage, like sometimes you make a mistake and you just go with it, Melanie. Like it's part of the show, and people can see a little bit of, how we respectfully talk to each other behind the scenes. Don't do that.
Don't do it. Yeah, bossy, so bossy.
We have an upcoming event. I'm going to share my screen. Why don't you remind viewers what's going on?
So the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, PRCOC.ca, is a coalition of lots of different groups that, mostly parents groups, who are fighting against gender ideology, are finding ways to right some of the wrongs that are going on and working together to do so. And there's a summit, a virtual summit, so a Zoom summit coming up the 27th of January, which is a Saturday. And the registration is currently open, so anyone can go to that website. There's a QR code on the screen that you can also use to access. But if you register, it's 12 till 4, so there'll be a few speakers. Part of that will be a toolkit. Part of that will be a discussion of the legal aspects. There's lots of different topics that will be covered. I think it's going to be interesting, maybe not just for parents, but anyone who might have some interest in what's going on in gender education, I guess, in schools and what that means and what people are working on. So that is coming up next. I believe that is next weekend, isn't it? Yes, it's next weekend.
Yes,
so a week from now.
Today we're recording the 20th, Saturday, so it's a week from today. That may affect our normal weekly Gender Wars report because we'll be recording for probably 4.5 hours on Saturday. Now, for viewers, I read a fantastic book a few years ago called Death by Meeting, and the writer took a kind of negative approach to why would you put people together in a room or get people together on a Zoom conference like this, and how are you going to make it compelling? And so what we've done is we've woven a narrative arc for the day. Melanie is going to begin the day with, we're going to look at the Trans-Affirming Toolkit for Ontario teachers. We're going to spend 30-40 minutes on that and what it is that they're pushing and promoting and some of the really blatant ideological agenda behind it. We're going to follow with a bit of time on books in libraries. Now, there was a great video that came out, I think it was yesterday. The head of Moms for Liberty was on Joy something on MSNBC. It was just a horrendous interview on the part of a journalist. And the head of Moms for Liberty was talking about some of these books that we're finding in schools. and why some of these graphic images are a challenge for many, many parents. So we're going to look at where those books are, how to find them, what's in some of those books, and how pervasive it is. Then we're going to have a special presentation from at JustDad7, who we talk about fairly frequently. He's a co-author of an actual evidence-based policy guide for children with gender dysphoria in education. Really fortunate to have him as a guest. JustDad is a retired lawyer from Manitoba. His name is Peter. And following Peter's presentation, we're going to have Bruce Pardy. Bruce Pardy is Queen's Professor of Law and contributor to a number of different think tank publications as well as the National Post. And he's going to talk a little bit about how these activists in the education system weaponize accusations of human rights violations and how to overcome them. Then we'll have a great panel presentation from some successful parents and parents groups who've been pushing back against schools and engaging them successfully in some capacity. And we'll finish off the day with Dr. David Haskell from Wilfrid Laurier University. Professor Haskell is going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, under which gender activism falls, and just the state of affairs with DEI. Dr. Haskell has done a ton of research on this, and it's going to, the iron is hot right now on this issue. And Bill Maher last night on his show had some very strong criticisms and guests for DEI coming from the Democratic side of the American aisle. So diversity, equity, inclusion is really under fire, and we're going to put that whole day together. A little bit of drama, a little bit of narrative direction, momentum. We want to give people skills. We want people to be engaged. And then following that, on our channel, we're going to slice up these presentations over the course of a couple weeks and share them with you so that you can share them with friends and share some of the highlights.
Lovely.
All right, where we can start? Okay, this is Jamie Sarkanak with this image. Really boring, right? It's the coat of arms. But there's been changes to court practice guidelines and general practice guidelines in the court processes in Canada at the federal level. Pronouns and land acknowledgements. This has been a feature in BC courts for quite a while, where people are obligated to state their pronouns at the beginning of their hearings or trials. And this is just, confession of ideological commitment. My friend Rupa Subramanya, she's a journalist here in Ottawa who writes for Barry Weiss, the Free Press. I thought her comment was really insightful. Shocking that rather than standing above ideological conflict, which at present is polarizing and dividing our society, the courts have doubled down by allying themselves with progressive positions on gender pronouns and land acknowledgements. Where in Canada's constitution does it say that we have to use pronouns and do land acknowledgements? It's pure ideological zeal from what should be an apolitical, non-ideological court, whose sole job is to interpret and uphold the law. Those who worry that Canadian courts are excessively deferential to government of the day will now also see that they've bought into a progressive woke ideology and will very legitimately wonder how fair such a court will be.
Do you know, Shannon, if the guidelines or the new procedure is obligatory or is it mandatory? Is it optional? Because
it's going to be part of the court ceremonies. Yeah. Courts are very ceremonial. There's a lot of I forget what the right. It's ecclesiastical.
They said there was an option for land acknowledgements, but it says to provide the pronouns. So I'm wondering, if you don't, obviously you could. It sounds like you can not request a land acknowledgement, but if you don't provide your pronouns, I wonder what would happen then. Do you think this is mandatory?
I believe it is mandatory for pronouns. I'd be curious if hopefully I never wind up in federal court for some reason, but I have a canned land acknowledgement that would really, really cheese off the progressives because I actually I was taught about about prayer and acknowledgement by an Indigenous medicine man and storyteller 25 years ago, and it's a beautiful prayer, and it fits into that space at the beginning of the ceremony. But it would just, there'd be apoplexy from the progressives for cultural appropriation. Anyway, I would take the opportunity. Speaking of compelled speech, Jordan Peterson's been pushing back on pronouns and compelled speech since 2016, when Bill C-16 was proposed. He testified before the Canadian Senate, and periodically he gets himself into hot water, which he's learned to navigate pretty well. Were you at did you go to the CPO protest last spring? Probably not.
I did not. Nope.
Chanel Fall and I went down. So during the hearings, or I guess when they were making decisions, there was a protest day at the offices of the College of Psychologists of Ontario, and there was several hundred people there. There was stage set up and amplifiers and things like that. We went down to support Jordan Peterson on a particular day. They have ruled that he must take his mandatory re-education training. You can see here that Poilievre has given words of encouragement. Authoritarian bureaucrats will not silence Jordan Peterson. They will only make him stronger. And that seems to have been the case for the last almost 10 years since he's really become a public figure.
I've heard mutterings that he is going to record them as well.
Yeah, he said he would do that.
Do you think that's possible? I think he might be able to, because if that's the case, that would be a great result, really, because being able to see what goes on, the inner workings of it, seems to be having quite the effect right now.
I can't imagine being the person who is tasked with doing this, because it's the college appointed specialist who and there's no criteria for when they will decide.
That'll be like an equity officer, right? So that's the specialist.
Yeah. It's basically a struggle session.
Yeah.
Right. So they're gonna set him up so he's got to confess and acquiesce to their claims about causing harm and what have you. And then the unspecified line is, okay, when you're rehabilitated, you can stop paying for these regular sessions, and we will consider your punishment over. It's very Maoist.
Yeah, well, I for one am here for that. I'm here to watch them. I hope they're televised or internetized. Yeah.
Now, here's one of the things that caused. I'm going to jump a slide here, because there's a Sports Illustrated story that relates to the Jordan Peterson case. Now, on the left of your screen, the model in the black bathing suit was the model and the cover photo that Jordan Peterson made a comment about that formed part of the core complaint against him with the CPO. And he said that this is not attractive in the context of athletic models, and that, what else did he say? I mean, he made comments in general about health and obesity and what have you, and why we're promoting these things. So this was the reprimand that he had said that this was not attractive. This was body shaming somebody. On the right hand of the screen is a man. Those are not real boobs, and you get a professional photographer.
There are also lots of women with not real boobs.
Fair enough. Okay, but he didn't have them before. So Sports Illustrated really lost the plot, and we got news yesterday, in the last 48 hours anyway, that the entire staff of Sports Illustrated has received notice of termination. Everyone's been fired. The majority of subscribers left Sports Illustrated, and the business model is failing, and the entire woke enterprise is now done. So another example of woke and broke. Couple other examples of their cover photos. On the right, Megan Thee Stallion. On the left, Martha Stewart. I think Martha Stewart here is pretty sexy, to be honest with you. She looks
well. She does look great, but she also probably had a lot of help with that. very few models
airbrush
are not helped out with that.
Yeah. But these are the kinds of covers that have become routine for Sports Illustrated. When I was a teenage boy in the 80s, I mean, like, Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue was like the thing that all the guys looked forward to. And it was part of the reason why all the guys subscribed, because subscribers, you got the magazine in the mail, and they featured athletic, attractive women. There's a whole conversation about body image and expectations and things here. And there's also, I mean, these kinds of covers are not unusual now to see the cover of Shape magazine and a woman with a, Rubenesque figure. And this is all part of woke ideology under fat studies. So we're seeing these body image changes all over the place. Recently, a big Canadian location for Victoria's Secret, when it was built, the second largest Victoria's Secret retail center in the world, shut down because Victoria's Secret went the same way, and they left kind of the fantasy objectifying images of fantasy women, and decided to go with
I think it's more critique.
Ideology.
This is kind of more critique on business, because the idea here is that should businesses become ideological, should they seek some kind of moral standard? And I think this was an attempt at doing that. Whether you want to call it woke or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But instead of necessarily doing what seeks profits, or perhaps the outcome here is that this particular ideology is not necessarily one that includes profits, because a business, at the end of the day, the goal of a corporation is to earn money, and it's to be accountable for earning that money to their shareholders. And so if you then start putting ideologies at the forefront of that, sort of EDI-related ideologies, equity, diversity, and inclusion, in this case it would be that acceptance, kind of pushing that kind of morality onto people. If they agree with that, that could be quite profitable, right? An experiment.
Yeah.
It could have been that this was absolutely what the consumer wanted to have, and they loved it. But I think what we're finding over time is that it's not necessarily what consumers are attracted to. And as much as so I'm not saying that objectifying women is the ideal. This is not what I'm saying. But I think this is an experiment.
Who's your audience? Who's your target market? What are they looking for? The whole idea of entrepreneurship or being in business is that we solve a problem or provide a service or information that people want or need. That's a market. That's what makes the market. And if a business suddenly decides we're going to sell you something you don't want to buy, then people are going to say, wait a second, well, I don't want to buy it, so screw you. I'm not obligated to buy it if I don't want it.
Yeah, I mean, it does raise some other questions about this idea of objectification. If that is profitable, then maybe that's a whole other conversation to have on whether why it is that our culture objectifies individuals and why that's profitable. But that's another question. That's another conversation to be had, really. So for me, the story really is more about how successful ideology and business can meld together.
Yeah. Now, the model here that Jordan Peterson commented on, which formed part of the complaint, was kind of one of the two major complaints that that formed part of it. The other was that he had misgendered Ellen/Elliot Page and made comments about her transition, FTM, female to male transition, surgeries, etc. And so, it would seem obvious when Jordan Peterson made the comment about this model a couple of years ago that he was onto something, because a lot of people, whether influenced by him or not, just decided they don't want to buy it, and now Sports Illustrated is done. And so all we need is for Elliot Page to detransition, and then Jordan Peterson will just have a fine time talking to the re-education apparatchik. Moving on from the beach, we're going to the pool. What's next, Melanie?
we are going to Orillia Swim Center, the recreational center in Orillia. I actually am up here this weekend in the Great White North for this very reason. I think a few weeks ago we mentioned that Nicholas Sapita, Melody Wiseheart, was scheduled to swim again with the Otters Swim Club. So I thought I would come up and have a little bit of an investigation and see what the goings on were. So I arrived this morning bright and early and noticed an OPP vehicle immediately. And I thought, okay, well, this must be the place. We are probably going to see a little bit of action today. We set ourselves up in the viewing gallery and spent the morning there. And Mr. Sapita never came. And so we wondered, okay, maybe this was a mistake, not quite sure. Went back to our lodgings and found out later, I don't know how true this is, I wasn't able to verify this, but I saw some mutterings on Twitter that the Otters Swim Club actually, a couple days ago, have switched from the Orillia swim meet to a swim meet at the Pan Am Centre, a lot near my house, in Toronto. And
well, it's a good thing you have friends where you are, because you get to hang out and see them.
Oh yeah, it's been great. No, I'm absolutely loving it. It's been a bit of an adventure. Unfortunately, I don't have any kind of on location reporting to do on this subject. But I thought that was
you're
kind of
hoping to get David Menzies' autograph.
Well, I thought if I assumed that he might follow this story, given that he'd been twice already. But no, it was just some parents. I learned about swim club parenting this morning. We have some really talented swimmers in Canada. I was kind of impressed by watching some of them. But no, I didn't. I wasn't able to see Mr. Sapita. So apparently he's at Pan Am. The other thing I want to say was actually from a turf account that I saw this information from, and this turf account did say that there were lots of police at the Pan Am Centre, and there were lots of media there. So I don't know if something's going to come out from that, but I hope so. And to be fair, I would rather a bunch of turfs be doing this than me, because I think that they have the fervor necessary to cover something like this. But yeah, that was a slight disappointment. I did find it interesting that it seems to me, if it's true, if it turned out to be true, that the Otters Swim Club and I guess Swim Ontario and whoever else is associated with it might have noticed a bit of attention on the story and switched at the last minute to sort of confuse people or mystify people. Throw people off. Yep. Yeah.
Interesting.
So I'm just going to say I can't turn my light on, so we're going to have to go with this lighting.
That's
picture.
okay.
We're going to have to live with that.
Because Melanie is on the road, our conversation I think is going to be a little bit shorter. We're not going to do our usual deep dive at the end of the episode, and we're going to move on now to WPATH. Now, we've talked about WPATH before. That's the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. They write the standards of care that everybody references. So all the Canadian Medical Association, Canadian Pediatrics, they reference WPATH, and the U.S. Pediatrics, American Pediatrics Association, for their justification for performing gender affirming care and pediatric gender care. 60% of the members did not renew. So from 4,120 a year ago, members of the WPATH in January 2024 were down to just under 1,600. That does a couple of things. One is, in situations like this, we get an ideological purification. It's like if you have salt water in a glass and you evaporate a bunch of the water, you get like super salty water in the bottom. And so we kind of expect that, the most radical of the ideologues are the ones that are still in this organization.
Right, but I'm just going to add to that I think you're right about the most concentrated radicals remain the saltiest of the salty. But that does mean, to me, it does indicate that many people are jumping ship because they're seeing that, or maybe they're starting to see things that they didn't necessarily understand before, or became clear over time. Because I genuinely do think a lot of people do view these the transgender trend, if we're going to call it that. Well, there you go, transgender trend, that it is about being kind, and it's such an easy sell at first when you don't go into the details of what that really means. And so to me, this is a positive story that perhaps, or a hopeful story that perhaps there are many more people who are starting to understand the consequences of some of the actions that are being taken. So,
yeah,
to me, it's a hopeful story.
This is a toxic brand, and the article that I saw, and there was some graphs published. There's the WPATH, and then there's USPATH, which is the American organization, and USPATH has lost the trend line in their loss of membership is the same. Another article I read this week is a former head of USPATH, who is a clinical psychologist, a trans woman, who wrote critically about this issue back in 2021 November in the Washington Post. Very, very well-known article. It was like a real breakthrough in a major publication criticizing the gender-affirming care for kids. Has resigned from WPATH, and not only resigned, but dissociated herself from the organization, saying that they're just it's too toxic.
Yeah. Well, I had dinner with a Canadian detransitioner last night, and one of the topics that came up is, and this person has been working to, I guess, educate people about transgender ideology for a bit of time. And I asked her, what do you think is going to change the mood? What is going to change the culture around this? How do you think we get out of it? And her response was essentially what we're talking about here, is that she really, really felt that when the tides turn, when the vast majority of people no longer view this as the right thing to do, then a lot of the people kind of stuck in it, I guess stuck in the cult, if you want to call it like that, would find it easier to get out of it. And I do wonder if that's true, but it just seems to me that reflects this story and the people sort of jumping ship at the minute.
Mm-hmm. Moving on. I think we're so from WPATH to the World Health Organization, United Nations. There was some major victory, I think, that the unsung heroes who are working behind the scenes. There's a lot of people who are not named who are working on this issue, whether it's like Discord servers or Slack channels they're communicating through, or Signal groups. In some cases, they don't even use their real names in those groups, so we don't even know who they are. We know a bit about their professional backgrounds, but it's still really difficult to talk about these things. And those groups deserve a lot of credit and a lot of recognition. I hope that someday soon we can recognize those people who were basically the anonymous underground.
They're the real heroes here.
Yeah. In mid-late December, this announcement came up that the World Health Organization was appointing a panel of 21 so-called experts on gender to advise policy at a global level on medicalization and medical treatment and human rights for trans people around the world. And they gave a consultation period of December 19th to January the 8th, which is strategic. It's right from the playbook of trans activism to try and limit public inputs and try and get these things slid under the radar and get them in legal place before they could be criticized. And groups, Just Add 7, who's going to be our guest a week from now on the 27th, and working with SEGM, Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, and some of those unsung heroes worked incredibly hard over the holiday break. And then there was a big release from the head of, I think it was Women's Equity, the UN, also wrote a letter very much in line. They succeeded in kicking the consultation period deadline from January 8th to the 2nd of February. But a couple of things have come out. One is that this, the World Health Organization is not touching pediatric gender at all. And their statement is that there is insufficient evidence to support it. It's a big, big deal. And then our friend Florence Ashley, who is
it's like a legal queer activist, really.
a queer legal activist. We talked
Yeah.
about him before, and he was on this panel. And the public relations bit is that there was a scheduling conflict. So Florence is out, and there was still a Canadian activist on the panel. There's still lots of work to be done here, but Flo is gone, and it looks like there's another activist who's sort of personal life and kinky shenanigans are out in public, and who knows how long they'll stay on the panel. The argument is that we need to have a balanced representation of gender critical and evidence based people with the activists. And the other major thing that came out of this was some of the assumption was that this report, this policy document was one and done, like it was finished. And this was just going to be rubber stamping all the way through to implement the policies that these trans activists have come up with. And now the WHO is saying, this is a 2-year project, and that means that there's a lot less urgency on this matter, though no less important. Here's our friend Florence Ashley. Points trans activists with Be Gay, Do Crimes tattoo to create guidelines on child sex changes. And now, and he was bragging about being on this panel recently, saying, I'm looking forward to this on whatever the date was. So clearly the scheduling conflict was, let's say something came up.
Yeah, well, you mentioned earlier that the playbook, I guess, queer activist or trans activist playbook has been to try to do things quietly under the radar so that they don't get too much attention, so that you can put activists on panels to get the things that you want in place. And I think that has been very, very effective for quite some time. And then over time, as people have come to realize the negative impacts of those things, whether it impacts their families, their jobs, whatever, as more and more people become aware of those things, it's becoming harder and harder for that playbook to be effective. So this is a really good example of that, where there are many more people who are watching this very closely. So in the past, they weren't necessarily watching this very closely, and so it was easy to fly under the radar. But now you have a lot of eyes, a lot of very clever individuals in very clever jobs who are not necessarily announcing themselves, but who are part of networks and who are very attentive. And when things come up, people share that information. And when that information is shared and it is a problem, these groups activate and put in a lot of hard work. And I think it's becoming a lot harder for some of the activists to have the same kind of effective under the radar success that they had in the past.
Yeah.
And this is another really hopeful story that the more people are working on this and paying attention, the more successes that we can have in turning the tide around a little bit. Especially with Flo.
I've been lucky to see a lot of those alerts over the last couple of years. One of my kind of, I don't want to say breakout moments, but one of the moments that really focused me on this activism work was the back channel urgent action alert that I got from one of these groups about Carolyn Brzezinski's presentation to the Waterloo District School Board, which were the 17th of January was a 2-year anniversary of that back in 2022. I literally got it as it was happening, and then was able to watch it on YouTube because it was put up immediately. And I had an open letter to the board of the WRDSB written that night and mailed out, and I had a chance to talk to Carolyn the next day because she read my letter and reached out in response. So, these if you're active in this world and you're part of some of these groups, you see know how this works. And if you're committed to taking action and to bring our communities back in line, help the pendulum come back to center. Pay attention to those alerts, not just behind the scenes, but watch them on your social media as well. And more hands make light work in this type of case. All right.
Go do work.
That's right. Our fearless, feckless, here's our Prime Minister. He was in St. John, New Brunswick. A longer, political speech, but I'm going to share with you a video.
In New Brunswick recently, there's been a lot of rhetoric about gender affirming care, and the Premier is making a lot of comments about potentially scaling that back. I'm wondering if you're worried about that rhetoric and whether you're worried the province will scale back gender affirming care.
I think Canada is the best country in the world, in part because Canadians respect each other. And in Canada, people are free to be who they are, to love whom they love. It's something that our party and, quite frankly, billions of Canadians will always stand to defend. Unfortunately, we are seeing in certain parts of the country, in certain political parties, try to instrumentalize divisions or intolerance into political advantage. We are a party that will always stand with everyone, be there to defend people's rights to be who they are, and I think that's something that all Canadians expect of their governments. We're a government that will always stand up for people's rights.
How rich? Without commenting on Pierre Poilievre, because that's what Justin Trudeau really likes to do, period. But how rich? The most divisive government in Canada in my entire lifetime, presiding over a country that is falling apart, that people are increasingly struggling, a leadership in this country that is dividing people on the basis of ideology, a prime minister who basically called parents biphobic right-wing extremists. You can do better, sir.
Can we really tolerate these people?
Can we?
And in the case of the convoy, these are the kinds of people who beat their wives and are probably racists. When I watch this, and I happen to watch it on a day, so I live in Ottawa, and Ottawa is a small town, and when your ears to the ground, things are happening. And so I got wind that Jean Chrétien's birthday party was in town this week. And I have crossed paths with Mr. Chrétien a few times in let's say, social settings. I wasn't invited to his birthday party, but I happen to know a couple of people who were. And one of them said to me that they were actually unsure of whether Trudeau was invited or not, but he was there. And his speech bombed. I don't remember all the details, but it was dead room.
Nobody likes you, Justin.
A tough crowd, and it was, he made some bad jokes, and it didn't fly well. And then, of course, after a number of other speeches, Mr. Chrétien took the microphone, and he was pointed about the role of the Prime Minister in Canada. That the role is to create and share an optimistic and positive vision of the future, to unite people, not divide them. And he was staring at Trudeau, according to my sources, through all of those comments. And I won't play the longer video here, but I believe, actually, based on what I heard about his speech, Mr. Chrétien's speech, about Trudeau in that room, that he actually took some notes. Because the rest of this speech was here in St. John, he was not just talking about uniting, but he, I will give credit where credit is due. I don't think he's due a lot of credit, but it seemed like he did use language that I hadn't heard him use, maybe ever, that was about integrating Canadians. Anyhow, I'll move on from there. And we have
Justin Trudeau. If you're ever listening to this podcast, I know you won't, but if you do better.
All right. This is a great shot. Toronto Star 2024. While we're talking about the current Prime Minister, we can talk a little bit about the next Prime Minister. And we've got a couple of comments from Faye Johnstone that I'm sorry, this looks very gay. I say that with the highest compliment. These guys look like they're having a good time. They're very cute together.
Well, they're having a gay old time, are they not?
And we've got a guy here that says, thank a straight person for your existence. Straight pride. Now,
yeah, I remember that summer. That was crazy. People really went nuts over this. People are really heterophobic. But I saw this post actually right before we started recording. It just popped up. This was actually a post from this is not a sorry, but it was actually from the Liberal Party, which I was a bit surprised by seeing. This is a Liberal Party Twitter post or X post, and it says concern about queer. Concern about queer rights under Poilievre-led government keeps me up at night. Faye Johnstone, president of the Society of Queer Momentum. And I was a bit I suppose I shouldn't be confused by these things anymore, but it did remind me of that panic over oh my God, straight people being proud of themselves. Oh no, what should we do? It's homophobia. Oh no, right? And because I remember that happening this summer. Anyway, I thought it was kind of funny. There's not really much to say on this post. Just again, liberals, if you're listening to this, and I'm sure you won't, but if you do better.
Yeah. I did clip this photo from the Liberal attack post online, and I wanted to juxtapose it with Justin Trudeau's speech. Now, by now we've all kind of realized, and Pierre Poilievre has a policy that if you want to shake his hand and get a photo with him at any event, he will stay as long as it takes to shake everyone's hand. And so this is common practice with politicians. And there have been people with crazy shirts who've squeezed up to Justin Trudeau and had their picture taken. I want to say someone got him to sign a Nazi flag or something, like weird stuff. And this is an equal opportunity, kind of attack ad. These are weak. And now that people sort of figure out that anyone can prank a politician like this with some dog whistle or coded message, and in this case, a fun shirt and goofy glasses that says straight pride. This is the Edmonton Oilers getting ready for their Pride game. We talked about the Pride Tape. I think we talked about it last fall, Melanie, when the NHL was making some changes to policy around these, and I have some insider NHL information about some of the politics and some of the practice here around Pride games.
Yeah, I'm wondering what this insider information is, because I came across this the past couple of days, actually. It was fairly recent that I saw this, and I didn't really have much of a reaction to it. I mean, I think I posted a comment somewhere saying something along the lines of, you want to put Pride sticker on your hockey stick, go ahead. I mean, I couldn't care less. Well, first of all, I don't even watch hockey, so that might have something to do with it. But it just for me, it really came down to don't enforce that upon other people. Don't make that a compulsory activity to announce your allegiance to some new ideology. But my personal opinion was man, I don't get the fuss over the hockey stick pride stickers. If you want to put it on there, go ahead. But maybe you have some insight that I'm not aware of that might change my opinion on this.
Well, last year, the NHL, they were kind of ham-fisted. It did not go well for them in the media. But then again, whenever you're dealing with the issue of trans, the activists are trained to problematize situations. They look for the worst possible interpretation of any straight person's attempt or criticism of trans ideology and practice. So the NHL said that players weren't going to be able to put any political symbols on their jerseys and on their equipment. Not to say that the NHL wasn't going to observe these things themselves, because they're still having the Pride games, and in Ottawa it is hockey is for everyone is their theme. And I was at the Hockey is for Everyone game last year, and they put a colored T-shirt relative to the colors of the Pride flag in seats all around the state, 18,000 shirts. And the idea was that getting people to do the wave in the stadium, wearing the colored shirts would move the colors of the flag around. Interesting idea, nice marketing, but the league's position was leave the players out of it. And part of that leaving the players out of it is actually a safety concern. There are a lot of Russian players and Eastern European players in the NHL. And if they were compelled by the ceremony to be wearing these colors, the concern was that if they were going home, that they were going to face backlash and it could be a safety concern. The league didn't communicate that very well, and there was a big mess, and they ended up reversing the decision. But where the league stands right now, as I understand, is that it is optional for players, and it is for warm-up jerseys and sticks, not for game time. So a player can choose that if this is a cause that's important to them, that they can wear the rainbow colors and wrap their stick and what have you, and others aren't going to be compelled to do it. What we've seen in other sports is that when whatever the league says everybody has to wear the jersey, and you get somebody who says, this doesn't fit with my culture of origin, this doesn't fit with, I'm a devout Christian, or I'm I don't believe in endorsing politics in any way, then those people become targets of the activists. So it's easy to single people out. And the idea here is that we'll give players the choice if they want to do this or not. And so we'll see what happens with the activists if you get a 20% uptake on the pride sticks, and then it's going to be hard to go after 80% of the players. But if everybody but two people on a team or have the pride tape and two people don't, then this is another excuse for activists to problematize and go after the athletes and attack them publicly. I mean, they go after sponsorship, they go after contracts. It's really despicable what some of these activists do, and it puts the players in a really difficult position. This is a disturbing story. We mentioned in the introduction, this is a convicted, likely to reoffend sex offender who has violated the terms of his conditions of disclosure of being a registered sex offender a bunch of times. He imitates people, and he steals people's not other people's identities, but in one part of the article, the Geneviève Gluck, who was writing this, described him as presenting himself as a priest, presenting himself as a doctor, presenting himself as a member of the British royal family, and he is presenting himself as a woman. He tried to get himself put into a woman's halfway house on his release. The courts said no. And even though he's likely to reoffend, he claims that he is going to have sex reassignment surgery, and that will make his likelihood of raping anybody, I guess, less likely. Now, we have no idea. We tried to find out where he was being released.
Well, it said that
we don't know.
From Toronto, but it didn't. The article that I read, which is the CBC, right before this episode, actually, I didn't have much time, said he's of Toronto. It didn't say whether he was being released in Toronto, so I don't know. I mean, that was the only location that I could find last minute, so I don't know if that might be worth looking into if you're interested in this particular story.
Yeah, I'm going to read you a little bit here. The convicted sex offender declared a transgender status in 2015 while in custody for the first time on charges of sexual assault. Began calling himself Tara, taking the name of his former wife, who on occasion told the court she'd married the man when she was 17 and he was 40. He told me he was a doctor and a priest. He's been diagnosed with a factitious disorder. I've never heard that term before. A mental disorder defined in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual as involving the falsification of physical or psychological signs or symptoms in previous decades, and in some cases, Pearsall has claimed to have HIV, to be a diabetic, suffer of chronic leukemia, A habitual liar, Purcell also claims to be a member of the British royal family, as well as a member of the Hells Angels. He claimed to have identified as a female from the age of 5, according to a forensic psychiatrist.
Yeah, my first reaction when you brought this up was, we've had this happen just a couple weeks ago in a similar way, a different person, but I can't remember their name. Laverne Wiseheart, I think the name was, in Alberta, who is a dangerous sex offender. And again, there were children involved here. Again, identifying as trans, probably more a question of going under the radar for whatever reason as cover. Being released into the public with some warning from officials, from police. So that is a bit of a concern. I mean, for me, especially if this is in Ontario in any way, that's a bit of a concern. So there seems to be a pattern where offenders, even though they are committing dangerous crimes and the police are warning the public that, yeah, they're committing dangerous crimes, they're probably going to commit it again, but we're just going to release them out into the wild.
Yeah. Well, we hope to keep an eye on this guy, and that if he shows signs of reoffending, that they move him back into a place where he can't hurt anybody. I first came across this woman, who's now the BC Children's Minister, when there were Drag Queen Story Hour protests. I want to say it was last May, June in Vancouver. And she was an NDP MLA, they call them in BC, member of Legislative Assembly, and was out counter-protesting the protesters of the Drag Queen Story Hour. And there were some, some spicy, and maybe even intense emotional moments in the protest exchange. And this picture of her surfaced, and now she's received I guess it's cabinet, as becoming a minister. And of course, we know where her ideology and her beliefs about children lie. At the same time as people are fleeing the WPATH ship, and the World Health Organization is saying we're not touching pediatric gender at all because there's no evidence. You get a person like this given the file for the health of and well-being of children in a significant province in Canada.
Well, you were talking earlier about the activist playbook that is in place, and if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the activities in the playbook was to actually put activists in positions of influence. And so that is another thing that needs to be addressed over time, is I think I've increasingly realized that, that there are many people who have disengaged from civil discourse, from culture altogether, from a lot of this crazy stuff that's been going on over the years, certainly in my circles. So I think about, I guess, left-leaning, maybe middle-class, educated people who are not woke necessarily, not overly progressive, but are kind of fed up with the culture, kind of fed up with the things that are going on. They disengage from politics. They disengage from their communities. It's sort of like, okay, so an example of that is, I don't use social media, right? That's a popular sort of thing. It's the disengagement with the popular culture, the disengagement with the politics of the day. But with that, I think there's an advantage for some of the more radical people to then take positions of power. And that's kind of what we've seen more and more in Canada, is that as people, this is just a speculation that I'm making, is as people disengage from the political process, I guess the more normal people, or more rational people, or more centrist people, there's less and less variety or diversity of thought within those seeking the positions of power, certainly within parties like the NDP or Liberals. So, or even probably even in the Conservatives, there does seem to be a lot of that in there as well. So I suggest that if there's an area that people may wish to participate in, so sometimes people ask, what can we do? We should do something. What should we do? How should we act? And one of the things I'm coming to the conclusion of one of the things that we could do to act is become more politically engaged. I don't necessarily mean run for, minister of the province or anything like that, although perhaps you want to do that in the future. But even just local parent council or your local city council, or just getting involved in one way or another. And from the bottom up is fine too. Like, you could even just be part of your local city. I don't know. There might be some organizations there within the city.
If you go to church on Sunday, and your pastor or your minister is kind of using soft gloves around this issue and not taking a stand, there's an opportunity to speak with your church leadership. If you're involved in organizations that there's a terrific book by someone called Pickering, called woke. Gosh, now I'm Stephen Pinkor. It's produced by James Lindsay, and it is basically how to fight the systems and the tactics of woke incursion in institutions. And it takes some courage to speak up. Catherine Cronus, founder of Lighthouse, put up a great post, tweet today about the courage that we need to step forward and speak up about. We have to get engaged, and that can be as simple as recognizing an attempt at a scale of takeover of an organization. The activists attempt, someone I know organized a series of an ongoing series of very successful events in the business community here in Ottawa, and they were taken over by activists who demanded, first of all, like inclusion, and then when they got access that they didn't really deserve, then they demanded more entitlements, and then the next step is they demand to be on the board, or they demand control, and then the next step is they want all the control. And this happens in institution after institution. I'm going to put the name of the book in the comments because it really escapes me, and it's just this little thin thing that I'm not going to be able to find on my bookshelves.
I'm going to agree with you, but
counter wokecraft.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you, but also specifically, I do actually specifically think there needs to be more people who are willing to participate in the political process. Sure, go to your church and get some kind of have your voice heard in your church, have your voice heard on the board meetings at work, whatever. But very specifically, I do think there's a space for people to get involved politically, learn about including myself here, learn about the political process, learn how it works, get involved in your local area. I actually think that very, very specifically is something that is really, really needed right now.
Yeah. Unfortunately, politics and big leadership roles attract people who are interested in power. I believe I mentioned this last week. I watched a great hour-long presentation on this, and why basically we're getting, a concentration of egotistical, abusive police in the United States, and why we have politicians that are out for themselves and driving driven by ego and their own aggrandizement, and who will say and do anything in order to get power, and we're not attracting, there are a lot of good people out there. We're not attracting the good people who should be leading us, and by not acting, we're allowing space for people who are activists and ideologues to put themselves in positions of power. We're basically surrendering our lives, our countries, our communities, our school boards, our churches, and in some cases our workplaces to these activists because we're just not participating.
Yeah, well, we can start small. Just start in your local area. If you live in a small town, even better. Yeah, just get involved.
Yep. Moving on. All right. This is an interesting story. A doctor in Quebec, 40 years in practice. So, we're imagining this guy's in his 60s, maybe even 70s. Patient roster of 900 patients at the CLSC. That's kind of like the community health branches in Quebec. And he had somebody patient record him. They were demanding testosterone. A female person who was transitioning to male. And the doctor here, unfamiliar, we're in a smaller community, not up to speed on all the progressive language and pronouns and things, was saying, but, you're a woman. And the complaint was filed, and this person, in circumstances where we're short of doctors all over the country, and they've got this huge roster of patients to be responsible for, suspended for 3 months because of an activist, vindictive person who took the offense to being misgendered and identified biologically by their sex to be so harmful that we had to punish the doctor.
When I read the article, I got the impression that this doctor was kind of clueless. Kind of felt bad for the doctor in this story. So if you're out there, good luck. You learned a hard lesson. So our friend Julia Mallot put out a video this week that I particularly enjoyed. We forgot to add it to the list, but we're going to add it now. So there was a freedom of information disclosure from the Durham region about some of the corruption going on there, and some of the leaders there not necessarily following the rules. Now, I've had my own freedom of information request returned to me with a lot of information that I found quite juicy, and I've tried to release some of that information, and some people have.
So anyway, back to the Million March. A friend of mine submitted a request to the city of Pickering requesting all communication by staff and council leading up to the march. As expected, there were plenty of salacious examples of partisan behavior shining through, such as when Kevin, who I'm presuming is referring to the mayor of Pickering, Kevin Ash, asked, were these good people or bad people? And it's not a great look for public officials to be branding a certain portion of their electorate as bad people, regardless what they might believe. From this freedom of information disclosure, we now know that on the morning of the protest, P-Flag, a member of the counter-protesters, made a last-minute submission to the city to fly the pride flag on City Hall in response to the protests. Now, the Pickering bylaw is quite clear that staff hold the responsibility to determine which requests are accepted and denied, and they do have the jurisdiction to make this determination last minute. However, they also must follow the requirements of the bylaw, which explicitly states that requests for flag displays and flag-raising ceremonies shall not be approved for matters of political controversy or ideological belief. And I don't want to state the obvious here, but the city flying a flag in solidarity with counter-protesters is, how can I say it, a matter of political controversy. Now, I am not the first person to raise this concern with Pickering. One of their own city councillors, Robinson, raised this concern in the same email chain where this flag raising was being discussed by the councillors. She explicitly pointed out that this action was in violation of their flag raising policy. And it was a fraud. For those who know Lisa, you'll know that in Pickering City Council, she usually gets fined or sanctioned without pay, but that's a story for another time. So all of this so far is not great, but it gets worse because something else also transpired in the councillor's email chain. See, this entire chain began because on the morning of the protests, Councillor Linda Cook started a thread with all city councillors presenting a suggestion to raise the pride flag and asking for councillors to reply with a yay or nay on moving forward with the suggestion. And for those among you who are connoisseurs of the Municipal Act, you might be thinking that this constitutes an illegal meeting of council. And you would be correct! But you seem to have missed that this entire charade, where councillors have reached quorum and are discussing and voting on the business of the city of Pickering, is a huge problem. It's actually an illegal problem. And it certainly raises the question of how many other times these illegal meetings in Pickering have been taking place. How many other decisions have been made behind closed doors?
Yeah, so this video so I've seen this disclosure. I've seen it printed out. There's a whole stack of papers. There's actually quite a lot going on. And I imagine there's going to be a lot more coming out of this disclosure. There's many more stories to be made. That's just one small aspect of it. And I think Julia did a beautiful job. There is a lot of ideological corruption in Durham region, and it does need to be exposed. There are leaders there that are flagrantly flouting their own rules and silencing people. We covered. So I am not as familiar as I'd like to be with Councillor Robinson, but I think I'd like to become more familiar with her story, because this is one city councillor, who is actually defending the population that she's serving on these matters, and has been, as Julia kind of pointed out in this video, and as we covered a few weeks ago, that she was removed without pay for 3 months, it was 1 month, and then it became 3 months, essentially for sharing with the mayor's office that the citizens didn't want to fly the Progress flag, they didn't want to have universal bashing, and she was representing her constituents. So yeah, this was a great little expose on that, and I'm hoping that more will come. I thought it was great.
These are the things that we talked shortly a little while ago about getting involved in your communities. This is what happens when we don't get involved with our communities. We get corrupt politicians and who think they can just do whatever they want, and there's going to be no accountability for them. So they bend the rules and they skirt the processes and
have meetings behind closed doors
as they go along. Right? We see the same kind of corruption in the Waterloo District School Board. These pure ideologues, and we use bullying and lawfare and weaponizing the process of code of conduct investigations against political enemies for their own agendas. So great job, Julia. As always, Julia.
I just want to add one thing to this story. Is someone recently asked me in conversation. So I've done some FOIs and I guess leaked some of my own information, and so I think I appear like I have a lot of knowledge that I don't. I'm just a regular citizen, but that's not the story. The story I wanted to share was someone asked me which school board was the most corrupt, which one had the most problems. And this was an interesting question to me because I think I've come to the realization that I think they're all just as bad, and I think there is actually quite a lot of corruption that needs to be uncovered. So I don't think we actually know who's the worst. I think we have some idea. But for example, Waterloo and Durham, those are two areas that have very coordinated, organized parents who are getting involved in the process and who are exposing a lot of that corruption. And so on the surface, it might look like those school boards are some of the worst. Because, okay, right. So for example, at Durham, there was a whole controversy this spring about the book Genderqueer, and as the school board defended it to keep it in the libraries, and that was all over the place, and now we have Councillor Robinson and Pickering, and so you see all these things, and then you see there's a lot going on in Waterloo that we covered as well, but it doesn't mean that those school boards are the worst. What it means is that those school boards have parents who are dedicated and who are constantly on the matter and pushing it and doing it step by step by step, and they're little steps all the time. And so what we don't have as much of in Ontario, I'm just talking Ontario, but this could apply to any province or any area, is groups of parents getting together and organizing amongst themselves to keep using the system as it was meant to be used and bringing their concerns to those boards, to those parent councils. That's the difference. And so if we had the same thing in Toronto, for example, or in York Region, or in Peel, or even in other provinces, sorry, I don't know the names of your areas, but any of those, I'm quite sure that we would uncover a lot more of this ideological corruption going on. It's just a question of people becoming more organized, getting together. And I just want to do another plug in here, is that the PRCOC, the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, one of the aims of this group is to bring together and share successes with other groups, and maybe perhaps help groups get together, help individuals find groups that are appropriate for them, that may be in their area or in their area of interest. Because what we need is more coordination. What we need is to be more organized and share ideas and share successes, share where it didn't work so well. That was just to add that I don't think it's necessarily that these are the worst. It's just that these are where we are actually seeing coordinated groups of people having success after success after success.
Yeah. In my own school board here, the large public board in Ottawa, the OCDSB, has had all kinds of drama. Neely Kaplan-Murph, she was the Jabapalooza doctor during the pandemic. She's got herself into all kind of controversy. She's currently suspended from meetings and committees because of unanimous vote that she violated the codes of conduct as a school board trustee in a number of different areas. But she's been a distraction, because if she hadn't been such a lightning rod for attention in our community, we might be seeing a whole lot more of the ideological corruption and the abusive process and the garbage happening at the Ottawa school board level. We know that there's a lot of just facepalm level stuff that goes on.
Yeah, but we need groups of people who are organized that are able to bring that to the surface, because it is there. Like, that's the thing; it is there. We just need to be able to expose it.
We're now 2 years from the point where we need to field candidates for the next school board trustee elections in Ontario. And it seemed like 4 years was a really long time when I ran back in 2022. But it was about this time of year that I started giving serious thought to running for the fall and what it would take to launch a campaign. I live in Neely Kaplan Mirth's riding, and honestly, I've been thinking recently of just going to start knocking on doors and talking to people and taking names and getting people engaged with conversations about the school board and becoming more known in my community as someone who's just getting out there.
Well, that's the thing, is that that's kind of what you would imagine. Well, okay, look, I didn't exist in the 60s. I wasn't alive. I didn't exist in the 40s. But I would imagine that was the whole point of a political process. That's the whole point of democracy or liberty, is that you are responsible for your community. You're responsible for, as you become an adult, it becomes your responsibility to become engaged in the civic process. And so what you're describing is just taking that into your own hands, actually talking to people. Like, it doesn't have, like, when I spoke to someone and said, are you engaged in anything, to some peers that I have in the UK, look at me like, I can't change the world. I'm not going to become prime minister. But forgetting the point of what you just said, it's more about getting engaged in your local community, even if it's just about your neighbors. That's kind of what I was saying about getting engaged locally. I like that idea. Maybe I should do that myself in my own neighborhood, because, door knocking and just talking to your neighbors and seeing what's up. Because if anyone else is like me, when I talk about this to people that I come across in my day-to-day life, whether it's at the gym, whether it's at work, whether it's anywhere, most people pretty much agree. And so if you can get some kind of consensus in your local area, and then you can bring those concerns, you might even come across some people that want to join your group who just have no idea what to do. I'll tell you a story actually about that. I was part of an improv group, and I did improv for a while just out of leisure, but I definitely kept my political views and my cultural views to myself, because I knew that this was a group that would not accept this whatsoever. So I never talked about it. And then one day I decided to tell the group, we had a WhatsApp chat. And in that WhatsApp chat, I was like, oh man, I have this gender wars thing going on, and, I want to spend more time with that. I don't have a lot of time. I'm going to tell them that I'm leaving. So I said, okay, so I'm leaving. I have other projects I need to work on. And they asked me, oh, what projects? So I tell them, okay, well, I have a podcast. And obviously they asked, well, what's your podcast about? Can we see a link? And I thought, I'm not going to send a link. Then I thought, oh, what the hell? I'm never going to see these people again. So I send a link to the gender wars. Well, didn't hear anything from them. I will never hear from them again. I know what they're like. They have absolutely decided that I'm deprived, but that's not the story. The story is, there was a man called Paul. Hi, Paul and Markham, if you're watching. He got in touch with me through private DM on WhatsApp. He was in that group. I didn't know Paul. He was part of a group before I ever even joined. He was just part of the WhatsApp, and he saw my link. And he went onto the link and he watched one of our episodes, and he got in touch with me, and he told me, he was like, can't believe people think this. And we ended up calling on the phone. I was just walking around as I do in my neighborhood over the summer, and we spoke for quite a long time over the phone. And he absolutely wanted to tell me that he was so happy someone felt this way, that he'd noticed things had changed, that that he didn't know what to do about these changes, and he was like, someone in my neighborhood is talking about these things. So the whole point of the story is just to say that sometimes if you engage in that way in your community, like, this guy was genuinely really grateful, right? Like, that he was able, I haven't heard from him since, so if you're out there, hi. But it sometimes we just need to talk about it. We need to talk to our neighbors. We need to talk to people around us, because there are people out there that really do feel the way that you do, but don't feel that they can talk about it. They don't feel like they can come out. They don't feel they can say something. And as soon as someone makes that okay, gives that permission,
100%.
It's just like an outpouring, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the kind
That's
of thinking that's the thinking that we were kicking around a couple of years ago in my local FAIR chapter. FAIR stands for Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. And I'm an arm's length associate of the local FAIR chapter. When you get involved in politics, it's what I decided to do was to say, okay, guys, like, you do FAIR, and I will be like sort of a member at large, maybe, or a guest to your meetings, but I don't want to what I'm doing to negatively impact you. And FAIR is a terrific organization. They do a lot of great work behind the scenes, letter writing. They've got a FAIR in medicine and all kinds of great stuff. And I shared with them, and this was the formulated thinking, was that we need to give people permission to talk. We need to be, and I felt I needed to be a person who would stand up and take the slings and arrows, and then give people permission to talk about nothing else, to talk about me and what a problem I am. And so that ideas can get out there and that conversations can happen. And the more that I talk to people, like I've very rarely had a conversation with somebody that was uncomfortable. And most people, at least,
that's because you've never been to improv class.
The Gen Xers and Gen Y for sure, and the generation that's older than us are all scratching their heads going, there's something wrong here. And giving people permission to talk about it, to ask questions, just opens up dialogue. And now I have people coming up to me. Some people I haven't seen in quite a while. I'm like, I was following your campaign, and a great thing to do, and like, wow, so much has changed. And like you said about your friends in the UK, Melanie, they're like, well, what can I do? I can't change the world. You can't, perhaps, but maybe you can change one person. And if you can communicate with two people and change their minds and motivate them to do the same thing, if everybody does that, we change the world. It's an exponential growth in very little time. We have a mass movement that's pushing back on this. Open communication, and I can see it happening.
Yeah, I think if you try to look at it as trying to change the world, which is this grand idea in the toolkit, just a little plug for the toolkit. You hear them talking about that the teachers are all about changing the world and whatever. It's a grand idea, but ultimately, it's also quite intimidating if you look at it that way, because it is difficult. If you go from nothing. I was not politically engaged at all. I was one of those people I described. I did not have social media. I didn't care about politics. I stopped voting actually for a while. I just could not. I was like, what the hell is this? All these people are absolutely insane. And so that's the kind of mentality that lets us creep in, right?
Yeah.
But then if you then start thinking, I need to change something, but I have to change the world, it's actually very, very, very intimidating. But
how do you eat an elephant?
Right. But what I realized
one bite at a time.
Precisely. The real change is only happening a little step by little step. And so the situation we're in now, although it looks like it happened all of a sudden, it's actually been small incremental steps over many, many decades. I think there's just been a paradigm shift over the last few years. And so it's, for whatever reason, lots of things have happened. And so you see a spill out of that ideology all at once. But these are things that have been going on actually for a very, very long time. Another plug. I will be discussing this in my own introduction to the toolkit over the January 27th. I'll be going over some of the history of that and some of the mindset behind this toolkit and where it comes from and so on and so forth. But it has been going on for a really, really long time. So when you're not paying attention, you start looking at it. You're like, oh my God, this thing happened all at once, but we can change this too. You just need to become more involved and just do whatever you can locally as much as you can.
Melanie, I had a video I was going to play from Chio, and it goes back a couple of years. I think I'm going to put a pin in that. And we often do a deep dive and have a great discussion at the end of our Gender Wars report. I think this is a good place today to kind of, wrap things up and say thank you to our viewers. If you like this video, every week I segment the video. So I don't always get it done by the time of publication, but we try and break the video up into shareable parts. You can share those micro links of segments of the video that you find interesting and put that on your social media feed, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. If you're on Twitter, let people know that we're doing this podcast. If the conversation about gender is coming up in your environment, let people know, hey, there's a great podcast focuses on the news in Canada. We do as objective an analysis as we can, and try and share information with people about what's happening and what they can do.
And
you're laughing at objective, aren't you?
Yes, I am. We are not objective.
We are biased. It's true. We have a bias.
There's no objectivity here whatsoever. In fact, if I could introduce more objectivity,
I realized as I was saying it.
I can't hide this face. I'm a genuine person. What can I say? But yeah, like and subscribe if you like it. We'll see you next week.
Have a great week, everybody. Good night,
Bye.
Melanie.